From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Gone in the Fog.
Today with special guest Beth Rowland, writer and proprietor of the blog Gone in the Fog. Remember, if you've got a tip for Melissa on anything, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. And now here's your host, checking IMDb to see how much work that actor playing the wise old dad in the Hallmark Christmas movie she's watching has actually gotten since he played Mallory's boyfriend in Family Ties, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. Poor producer Mark, who must suffer through the now Lifetime and Hallmark movie channel compendium, pretty much starting in, October?
Yes, it's a compendium. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
You are forced to watch so many just shitty holiday movies. It is fun, though, watching, not so much Mallory's boyfriends, but Mallory's dad play different versions. Like sometimes Michael Gross has a mustache,
right,
and sometimes he doesn't. And he's not like overweight or anything. It's just the way the Lord made him.
Right.
It's just he needs a beard, and he looks great in a beard. And a lot of guys do, and some guys don't. But when they have them and then they take them off, and you're like, oh no, that should come back.
Well, the thing is, I don't recognize Michael Gross anymore when he's in these movies because but the thing is, it's not that he's playing somebody's dad still
or grandpa,
but he's playing grandpa.
Yeah. The movie where he played a Santa is the one where I almost lost my shit.
He played a Santa. Mm-hmm. I don't remember that one.
It was not good. Because they're always like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Men named Chris.
Yeah, right. His name was Chris.
Kringlish. Yeah. Kringale. Kringalini. It's like, I get it. Santa. Brian Doyle Murray was a good Santa.
Yeah, you believe him. Because he's even got the voice for it.
He does. He has a great kind of cigarette kind of voice. Yeah. That's why I always call him a cigarette voice. But whether they smoke or not. But it's like he does. He has you're exactly right, producer Mark. Brian Doyle Murray did a wonderful Santa up in I think he was in Alaska.
Yeah.
And he had like this
what do you mean? He wasn't
factory?
Santa. Santa doesn't exist.
Right.
This can't really be
It's
true.
A man named Chris.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Kringala.
Yeah.
Kringle.
Yeah.
Kringle. Chris Kringle. He's French, has an accent.
Right.
And an umlaut. He's German French, exactly. French-German.
Yeah.
Kringalala. He
had
a son who was a very tall, handsome brunette elf.
Right.
And Candace Bure.
She got three names. It's Candace.
Candace Cameron Bure.
There you go.
I think, yeah. She was a doctor who just graduated and was offered a residency at a small Alaska.
Yeah. And she didn't want to be there, though.
No.
She wanted to be back.
But she fell in love with the elf son.
Right. She fell
who
in love
was very tall, like a 6'2" elf.
She fell in love with Elf Kringle.
Yeah. Dave Kringle. Chris Kringle's son. Yeah. Jeff Kringle.
The thing is, they never have names like Jeff or Dave. They're always like, Spencer or
Spartacus.
Tyler or...
Tyler Kringle. Yeah. I would never date a man named Tyler Kringle.
Yeah, Justin. I mean, they're all going to be...
Drake.
Yeah.
Drake Kringle. Yeah. Anyway, as Mark and I just sit and laugh our asses off, there are actually people who want to know about something.
I know.
And speaking of things that are funny and smart and much smarter than Drake Kringle and any Hallmark movie, it's our friends from the Bloody Murder podcast. They are Australian, but don't hold that against them. I'm kidding. They're amazeballs and funny and smart and wonderful. And I love them so much, I even ordered their backpack with their logo on it. And it is worth every penny. It's got a lot of pockets and it's really well made. And I know I'm doing a commercial for them. Anyway, here's their promo.
Is listening to true crime podcasts all the time getting you down, but you just can't stop?
Try listening to Bloody Murder.
We're an Australian comedy true crime podcast focusing on some of the lesser-known murder cases from Australia and around the globe.
We use black comedy as a means to tell horrifying true crime stories.
But our humour is respectful and never at the expense of victims or their loved ones. Bloody Murder has been nominated for 4 Australian Podcast Awards.
We've been going for over 3 years now.
So we have loads of episodes for you to binge.
You can listen to Bloody Murder on Spotify and any of your favourite podcatchers.
I feel like we were really lucky to get to talk to Beth Rowland. I don't remember how many months ago. It was quite a while ago. I believe it was Tipster Jeremy in Kentucky who said, "Hey, are you familiar with Gone in the Fog?" And I'm like, no. And I thought it was a podcast. And then I looked into it and I'm like, oh, it's a blog, which I just fell in love with because, you know, as much as I love podcasts, sometimes I get a little ear exhaustion. So I'd much rather have some eye exhaustion, and I love to read. But Beth does a very unique thing for her blog. She writes a chapter, and it's about one specific case, the disappearance and then murder of Cheryll Spegall in Northern Kentucky. And it's a very old case, and she has really revived it. And she is a great writer, but she does another thing which I think is really wonderful. In addition to the written chapters, she then records the audio and includes that. So my new obsession is when I'm not sleeping is to read first the blog post's chapter about Cheryl's case and then listen to the audio. It's the same thing.
It's kind of like a living, breathing audiobook.
It is.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. She's like voicing her own audiobook. And it is really a book in the making. She'll probably end up writing a book in my mind. I mean, I don't know if that's something, we didn't talk to her about that, but I'm hoping that's something she'll think about doing. She's a teacher and she's a natural instructor and good at explaining things in a way that any audience can understand. And she does a lot of work on it in her spare time, probably takes time that she doesn't have and works on it. So if you're familiar with goneinthefog.video.blog, you know how beautiful it is composed. And she has a Facebook page. And if you are in the Northern Kentucky area, if you're familiar with Campbell County, and if you know anything, I know you will come forward and say something. Now's the time. And we know you're going to really enjoy this interview with Beth Rowland. Thank you so much to Beth Rowland for being with us today. She is the author of the blog Gone in the Fog, and it is about a specific case in the Northern Kentucky area, and she has so many connections to it. I found the blog through a listener to the podcast who said, "Have you heard of this?" And I said, "No." And I found it, and it became one of my new obsessions. And I love reading and listening to the chapters of the blog. Thank you for being here today, Beth.
Thank you very much for having me on and for giving me the chance to talk about Cheryl's case.
It is our joy to do so. And Cheryl's case was one I would not have been familiar with, even though I was a kid in the area at the time. Not exactly the same area. I lived in Pendleton County, but I wasn't even familiar with Campbell County until probably high school. I guess maybe football rivalries, but that area, now my best friend lives in Alexandria. I went to college in Highland Heights, so I'm, familiar with the area now. But Cheryl's case is one that is so haunting from such a long time ago. It just is. It does need to be brought out into the light. But before we talk about the specifics of Cheryl's case, I want to talk about the specifics of you. So I, never know what to expect when someone says, "Hey, there's a blog or there's a podcast." And I go in with extraordinarily low expectations because I'm just really a picky bitch. And I found your blog and I was like, this is spectacular. You're a great writer. I understand you're a teacher, a music and vocal teacher, but you're a wonderful writer, and it's so authentic and sincere and comes from your heart. And one of the things I love about the blog just one of the things I love about the blog is that you weave your experiences and your journey working on Cheryl's case in with the details of Cheryl's case. So they're never too far apart. They're never separated. And it just makes it even more full of a story because it's got both of your journeys and other people's journeys in there too. It's so fascinating to me. And the more I read, I just became obsessed. And you do another thing I think is brilliant. It is a written blog, which I love because so few things are the written word anymore. And you are a great writer. But then you also go back and voice the blog. So there's an audio version of it. And I now love to do both. And you have to know I am really not the person to do that. I would just do one or the other. But I love reading your writing. And then I love hearing your voicing of your writing. It's a really great 1-2 punch. And if I feel like I've missed a detail from the written part, which I really haven't, sometimes it just becomes more punctuated with your voicing of your writing. And before you say one more word, you have a beautiful voice, and I don't like anyone's voice. I don't like anyone's voice, but you have a beautiful voice, and I know that you have said you feel like it's a little bit thrashed because of all of your teaching.
Right.
But it's not. It's an authentic, beautiful, beautiful voice. So let's start with, before we go into Cheryl's case, let's start with you dating your boyfriend,
right,
who becomes your husband, and he drives you by a house. So
Yes.
I want you to take it from there because it's such a great intro.
Okay. Well, thank you for that beautiful introduction. It means a lot. There. See, I said, I grew, I was trying not to do that. I grew up in Campbell County. I still live in Campbell County. And there's tiny towns here in Campbell County where we live. And so I lived in my house from the day I was born to the day I got married. And it's a neighboring town to where Cheryl lived. So my boyfriend grew up in Alexandria out here, just like you said your friend lived. And when we started dating, we were 16 years old, sometimes just killing time. So he had a little S10 pickup truck. And one day we just took a drive down the highway that I've driven on probably every day of my life living here. And he slowed the truck down and pointed to a man who was sitting on a porch. So I call him the man on the porch, and said to me, "Do you see that man?" And I said, "Yes." And I asked, "Who is he? Why are we stopped in the middle of the road looking at this guy?" And he said, "I don't really know, but growing up, my dad always told my brothers and my sister and me that if he ever approached us, we were to run the other way. Or if we saw his truck, never to be near him." And then, of course, because I always have 100 questions, I said, "Why?" And he said, I don't really know, something about a girl being murdered and they think he did it. And I stared at the guy, and the guy stared at me, like just looking at what we were doing, and not really anything creepy. It was just an older man sitting on a porch. And we drove on, and it's being a 16-year-old, life got busy. I never forgot it. I went by that man's house all the time. I too went to college in Highland Heights. I saw him out there all the time. And I always just wondered, did he kill somebody? And who was this girl? And I've always been true crime obsessed, I would say. I grew up watching the best television show ever, Unsolved Mysteries. Oh my gosh, I was obsessed. And so I've always had sort of an interest in that. And as I got older, just 3 years ago, I'd say, I started really asking around about the man on the porch and who the girl was. And my father-in-law had since passed away. So I had to start snooping to figure out what the story was.
So
but it all started from that just
from
random
your date.
day of driving by.
You're driving by with your boyfriend who explains, to you, "Look, my father said this and I'm saying it to you." He's like already showing his Sir Galahad, way of protecting you. Like, look, we're young and you're a beautiful girl. And if this dude ever comes near you, you run the other way. And let's explain then that your husband's father was a police officer.
He was. So Cheryl disappeared and her murder happened in 1971. In the mid-70s, in the same town of Highland Heights, my father-in-law was a police officer, and he moved his family to the town when he worked there. And my husband wasn't even born yet, so it was his older brother, his older sister, and my mother-in-law and my father-in-law. And they lived very close to the man on the porch. And I think when they moved the family there, he wasn't familiar with the story. But once he began working in the town, and it's a small town, so even though I wouldn't say he was an investigator on the case, he was privy to some of the details. He wanted his kids to know to stay away from that man. And they lived there for a while. My husband went to Highland Heights Elementary, the same school that Cheryl had gone to, until later on when he became a police chief in another town. They moved to that town, still here in Campbell County.
Okay.
So they were living in the town where this happened, and that's why he was imploring his children to stay away from the man.
And your father-in-law was a natural investigator, because you explained, and it's always shocking to me, but in small towns, a lot of times the police force is one or two people and a lot of volunteer or auxiliary or part-time police officers.
Yes.
And Tom was, Tom was like a part-time cop for a while. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And did other things. I mean, I'm always shocked at that, but we have to try and remember that we're talking about 1971. Mm-hmm. So you pick up, you remember the story that your husband told you, and you pick up from there, and you start looking at details and finding, I'm actually, hugely impressed with all of the things you have found, all of the avenues you have looked down. And I, found quite a few articles online, but honestly, the best place to find everything about Cheryl's case is your blog. You have like 56 chapters now, I think.
Right.
Yeah. And you have done, you've done like a squad room of investigators' research. I mean, it's fantastic, the work that you have done. So what was the first thing you found about Cheryl's case that made you think, I need to keep digging?
I know I started on Thanksgiving about 3 years ago, and my in-laws were all here, and I just said to my mother-in-law, what is this story? Michael grew up telling me about this man on the porch. Now I really want to know. And she said, I think the girl's name was Cheryll Spegall. I think they found her body out in the county somewhere. That's what we call it out here in the country, just out in the county. And it was in the early 70s. So
that was all you had.
That is all I had.
Wow.
So the reason why I've been able to do what I've done now is because of the power of the internet and social media. I just started Googling it and found old newspapers. And I do have a newspapers.com subscription.
Isn't it the best?
Yes. It is fascinating what you can find.
Yeah, it's not cheap, and it's worth every damn penny.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have used it a lot, not just for Cheryl's case,
of course, yeah,
other things we worked on.
Sure.
So I had a notebook, and I think it's partly being a teacher and partly I just enjoy writing and reading, and I just started filling the notebook with every detail from every article, and I was screenshotting the articles and saving them on my phone, and I have a whole folder on my iPhone just called Cheryll with pictures and old newspaper clippings, and then writing out the notes of what I was finding and trying to chronologically piece it together. And then I remember the first person I talked to was the lady that runs my son's daycare, because I thought, she's probably about 10 years older than me. I know she's from the area. I'll just ask her if she remembers. And I asked her, and she said, I remember when that happened. I didn't know her. I don't know the details. But I just saw somebody posted about it on Facebook.
Wow.
So she looks back on Facebook, sends me the name of a woman that had been asking, hey, does anybody remember this case?
Wow.
I grew up with Cheryl, and there I went on Facebook like, hi, my name's Beth. I'm looking into this. And people she just kind of spilled everything to me once I explained to her what I was and what I was trying to do. And
there are no mistakes. Let's go back to October of 1971.
Okay.
So you go ahead and tell us about Cheryl's story.
So it was a Tuesday morning, October 19th, 1971. It was actually Cheryl's 10th birthday.
Which is just cracking your heart in half thinking about it.
It is. And typically on a normal school morning, she and her two older brothers would walk to the top of the street to congregate with the other kids from the street in neighboring streets.
Yeah.
To wait for the bus.
Right.
And for some reason, she had fallen back to sleep that morning. So apparently she was dressed for school and dozed back off and was kind of coming to. And their dad told the older brothers, you have to hurry and get up there because they couldn't miss the bus because the high school where they were having junior high classes was far away. And
right.
Their dad really didn't have time to drive them there.
Right.
She was going to school in the neighborhood. So if I guess on the off chance she ended up missing the bus, he could have driven her.
Right.
So they hurry out the door without their sister and get to the top of the street, board the bus, never really realizing that she wasn't on the bus because they said she was always there. And the big kids sat in the back and the younger kids sat in the front.
Right.
And they were 13 and 11, I think, and they weren't really paying attention. And so...
And they're brothers. They're boys.
Yes.
Boys don't pay attention. Yeah.
They don't. And she never made it to school. And she never made it to the bus stop because she didn't board the bus. And their dad said that he saw her leave out of their back door, which the brothers have explained they never used the front door because they didn't want to soil the carpet. Like it was just the thing that they did. And they went out the back door and he saw her go into the fog. It was everyone has said that I've talked to and in the newspaper articles, the fog was so thick that day.
Do you think it was because it was like close to the river?
Yes.
Yeah.
And where that street sits, the Ohio River really is like over the hillside right below.
In their backyard, yeah.
Yes. So it's not uncommon for there to be fog. It just was unusually dense that morning.
Right.
And so it was 6:25. It would have been dark on October 19th.
Right.
And the fog was there and out she went by herself and she never made it to the top of the street.
So her brothers come home from school and then they kind of realize, hey, something's up.
Yes,
and
because she didn't get on the bus.
Right. And her dad calls and she had not made it to school.
Correct.
Now, I will tell you, one of the things from your blog that was a little shocking to me is that Billy Joe, her dad, called the police and they kind of looked for her, but not like really looked for her. I mean, I found until like the next day.
Yes.
I found that odd, even in 1971. I mean, she's a child.
Yep. How do I say this? I think it's a reflection of the small town Kentucky. And to be honest, I mean, kids don't just disappear and get murdered, right? And they just didn't know what to do. It was sort of a lack of investigative skills on their part. You know, you have your part-time officers.
Right.
I think everybody was kind of scratching their heads, but the belief was because it was her birthday, maybe she had gone off somewhere. And, you know, they were speculating in the papers that she hopped a bus to go visit her grandmother.
Her grandmother in Cincinnati.
And she could have been dawdling somewhere.
Right.
And the one brother, her oldest brother, said that he didn't really feel too panicked. He just felt that his sister was unaccounted for. But her other brother that was only a year older than her, when I spoke to him, he said, I knew something was really wrong.
And he also said, I lost my best friend. I mean, that's the connection that they had, maybe only being, 11 months and 29 days or whatever apart.
Well, can I tell you this?
Sure.
She turned 10 on October 19th.
Yeah.
And so her brother was also 10.
Right.
And he remained 10
For 2 weeks.
until November 2nd.
Yeah, and then
he turned 11.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, what are the chances?
Right.
She was found on his birthday.
Yeah. I never want to attach things. You know, they say a lot of people who are ill, like, wait until after the holidays to pass so that their family,
Right.
But I mean, you can't. I mean, I can't. It's her 10th birthday. She disappears. Her body is found on her brother's 11th birthday as he is, spent the last 2 weeks the same age as his best friend, his sister. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's just, there aren't enough ways to say this case is beyond heartbreaking.
Yes.
Beyond heartbreaking.
It's not fair. It's sometimes the universe works in your favor and the stars align and beautiful things happen. And then sometimes I just reflect on it and think, how unfair to those kids.
To the kids, to the family, to the neighborhood, to the police, it's just, unfair is a really good way to say it. And I hate saying that because I know life's not fair, but that's a really great description. Mm-hmm. So 2 weeks later, and what I feel like is a very odd occurrence, mm-hmm. Explain how and where Cheryl's body is found.
There was a milk delivery service out of Newport, Kentucky, and there was a man who worked there who, interestingly, would drive from Newport through the town of Southgate, through the town of Highland Heights, passing Rose Avenue every morning around 6:30, and would continue on with his milk deliveries throughout the day, all throughout the county. And he ended his deliveries in a neighboring county called Pendleton County on a road called New Hope Road, which back then and even now is this isolated country road that leads to nowhere.
Right.
There's like 2 homes at the top of the lane, and then it used to connect to down by the river, but there's some expansions and stuff that have gone on, so now it just kind of ends.
Right.
And he had delivered all of his milk except he had one house to go, and he decided he needed to relieve himself. So I guess because this was his normal route, he knew that this would have been an isolated place to do that. So he pulled his truck over and was urinating and looked down on the embankment below and saw an odd stacking of rocks and decided to climb down there. And he moved the rocks and noticed that there was a body underneath the rocks.
Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting. So he got back in his milk truck, went to the last house on his delivery, and asked to use the phone and contacted the police from there.
So I had forgotten the details that he would have driven by Rose Avenue, where the Spegal family home was, around 6:30. I had forgotten that detail.
Well, I had not written that in the blog because I just recently found that out. So you're hearing it here first.
Oh, I'm like tingling again. I was like, I had forgotten that, but I remembered the details of him, not having a place to go to the bathroom, and this odd occurrence of him going right where her body was found, or he found her body. And it's an odd thing to me that there are 7 large rocks stacked up. Like, so I know you have this family history of police work and investigations, and you yourself have opinions of how things go. I mean, it's not like either of us are profilers, but we've talked about enough of this stuff that we know. It seems to me that if someone stacks 7 or more or less rocks on top of a poor little 10-year-old body, they're really trying to hide some shit. Mm-hmm. It really just seems to me like that's not, how they say a lot of times if someone is killed in their home, if someone knows them, they put a blanket or something covering their head or face. I just think that's very odd.
I think I have 2 opinions about it.
Tell me.
I do. I think it could represent a grave of some sort. Why wasn't she just tossed over the side of the embankment?
Because why would she have even been found, quite honestly?
Right. And that whole stretch is down by the Ohio River. You could have gone anywhere. And it's so disgusting to talk about. But
no, I know what you're saying.
The amount of thought that was put into putting her there. And then the whole idea of parking your car, probably where he would have parked his truck. There's a little pull off there by this culvert.
Which, by the way, you took great pictures. I mean,
thank you.
Your blog is the one-stop place for everything. It's probably more comprehensive than the case file of anyone in the Kentucky State Police. It's comprehensive. I mean, she has pictures of everything, but the pictures of where her body was found were very compelling. And it's fascinating to hear you say it looks the same today as it did then. It's scary and frightening and should be just quiet and peaceful.
Right.
But it's weird.
It is very odd juxtaposition because it is serene and it's peaceful. And if you didn't know, you could get just lost in the moment. Yeah. It's just a beautiful place. But then when you know where you are, it's haunting.
Totally haunting. You're exactly right.
And you could take the photos that I took with what was in the newspaper back then and
match them up.
Even the trees look the same.
I remember,
it was spooky.
Yeah.
But somebody pulled over and took, if she was already deceased, took the nude, lifeless body of a 10-year-old and carried her down an embankment.
Right.
And granted, it wasn't a highly trafficked lane, but you have to have some balls.
You
to
really do.
That.
Yeah.
I just can't even wrap my head around it. I was down there just taking pictures, and I kind of wanted to hurry because I didn't want somebody to come down there and see us and wonder what we were doing. I can't imagine being there with a body.
Right.
So,
and then to take the time to stack. Yeah.
And how would you explain that? Either you're someone who's there all the time, or you're out of your head, or it was done in the dark of night or dark of morning, however you want to say it, and you were really confident you weren't going to be spotted. I don't know. But
what do you think from the research you've done and the evidence you've seen? Do you believe that it happened that morning and she was put there quickly, or do you believe she was held anywhere and maybe she was put, because she was found like 3 p.m, like 2 weeks later. I do find it odd that in 2 weeks' time, in October, her father had such a difficult time identifying her, other than the fact that there was some water. Maybe the water had done damage and decomp, or maybe the weight of the rocks. But I mean, 2 weeks just seems like, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and that's where I don't know. Like, I'm not an expert enough, but I do. She was face down with the rocks run her back, and it sounds like the majority of her was submerged in water. Okay. So one thing that I failed to do is research the temperature that day, but one of the readers of the blog did that for me and said it was 55 degrees, which on October 19th, I think is sort of warm for northern Kentucky. I guess it's October, but I'm thinking, let's say it stayed in the 50s, 40s, 30s.
It would drop down at night.
Yeah, and it wasn't freezing to help preserve. So I don't know. But
you know what? That's actually a good point. I got married the first time, October 18th, and it was 75 degrees that day. So there could be an Indian summer kind of thing. But yeah, that's, and speaking of your readers of your blog, you have the most incredible, group. I think you call them the Army, and they're like such detail-oriented, fascinating readers. I just love the group of people that are interested in Cheryl's case and follow the blog. They're like a great group of detectives also. They
are. I couldn't do what I do without them, and Absolutely. They are the voice of Cheryl. I kind of started it, but they all are kind of beating the drum with me.
It's
and
a choir.
They helped raise the money for headstone.
Well, speaking of that,
all of that.
I got to that chapter and immediately went to the GoFundMe, and it was closed because you'd already gotten enough money. But I wanted so desperately to contribute, but you didn't need it.
I've been
it was
thinking
such a
it would
beautiful
be neat
story.
to do something in her name. Like, there are other people buried with no headstones.
Right.
So could that be something we do in the future?
Well, we'll talk about that because that's such a beautiful part of the story. But okay, so Mr. Milk finds her and goes to the closest home. The police show up and they take her. And is she at the time the only kid missing from the area?
Yes.
Okay. So then, ironically, it sounds like she was taken to Hamilton County in Cincinnati because was that the closest morgue?
I think so. It sounds like she was taken to a local funeral home.
Okay.
And then they must have been kind of convening to figure out what do we do. And then I think because she was the only missing child in the area, they must have known they needed to have like a thorough autopsy.
And then they call Billy Joe to identify her, and he struggles to identify her. Now, at the time, I guess the police come and take her because it's clear that she's been a victim of a homicide.
Yes.
And it sounds really awful, the description. And when you said you have a whole file on your iPhone, I have a whole file on my iPhone and iPad. Mostly I read it at night. I read the blog at night in bed when producer Mark is sleeping and I'm not sleeping. But the 25, 26 stab wounds?
So, yes, that is what was reported in the newspapers. And it's interesting is that they gave up that number so easily at the time. Now police hold back some details.
Yeah, definitely.
But that they counted them and they said that. And that's fine. I did, with the help of some of my readers and family members now that I've gotten to know, I was able to get a copy of the autopsy report, and I made myself read it word for word and number by, and I'm not good at math, but when I was just counting stab wounds to various areas of her body, I had like 51.
Oh God.
Now, I can't see pictures. I don't know if maybe one stab wound could have created 2 puncture, but I honestly think it's more than 26.
More than 26. It was
a rage-filled murder.
And oddly, the description was that she was stabbed in a circular motion? So
I have not read that. I don't really know where that came from, because then people started saying it was satanic.
Right.
I think it was a very tiny murder weapon. I can tell that from the autopsy report.
Okay.
It was
like
I
a
would
pocket
say it was,
knife or something, or pen knife, or
very small tip. And I think I hate to say this again, but if you think of the abdominal region and chest region of a 10-year-old, when you have a small instrument like that and it's almost like you're punching. I would almost say that maybe not even on purpose, it's going to look almost like a circle. Just, I'm sitting here hitting my fist on my hand, that it might have looked that way, but it was not noted in the autopsy report that there was a rhyme or reason to it.
But it also mentioned she was sexually assaulted with instruments. Did that mean the weapon or something else?
So it does say that in the newspapers. And I have come to understand that the police believe she was sexually assaulted. And the medical examiner did not determine that to be 100%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I've just recently found that out.
Okay.
Meaning they did take swabs, and they said that there was no spermatozoa detected. Now, it could have been gone.
Right, if she was submerged in water, right.
But it could have not been there to begin with. So the problem that creates is that's 2 different types of motivation for killing. Because if she was not sexually assaulted, then it's an anger sort of issue. But if she was, then that has a whole different component to it. And it's so horrible to say, but it's so disappointing that there was no sperm found.
It really is. I mean, it sounded like they were almost moving in a backward trajectory on how to solve this. They were wanting to take Cheryl's fingerprints off of items in the home to see if they could match it to anything else, as opposed to trying to get evidence off of her body to match it to a perpetrator.
Yes.
It was very odd.
I hate to say I give the killer credit, but I don't think that the person probably was smart enough to know that it was a perfect crime. But without clothes, without sperm, without a murder scene, without a murder weapon, there's not really... I can't entirely fault the police back then because there was nothing to preserve.
Not much to work with.
Right. And in some of these old cases that get solved, and I get so excited for those families and those victims, it's because they still have DNA. The clothing.
Yeah.
Or they have the code.
I'm
or they have
thrilled that they took swabs. I'll be honest. In 1971, I wouldn't even thought that they, were mindful enough to think, hey, technology might catch up with us. Mm-hmm. I would think they'd be trying to, back then, I'm guessing the big thing would have been fingerprints, like trying to find some sort of a print on her or something like that. But I had forgotten that the murder weapon wasn't found. We're kind of speculating at the size and the type of weapon. Mm-hmm. And basically what you have to go on is where she was taken from, where she was found, and the way she was found. That's not a whole lot to go on. You're right.
Right. And the only hope I had, well, I have a lot of hope, but one of the hopes I had was that those swabs still existed. Like, are they in some evidence locker somewhere with the Kentucky State Police, or does Hamilton County have them on file? And nobody seems to have them. And really, we've kind of come to the conclusion that once they determined there was no sperm present, that they probably pitched them.
Right.
It's not... I wanted to fault somebody for like throwing evidence away, but I don't think it was ever entered into evidence to say that they lost it or disregarded it. It was just, they didn't think it was important. And you know what, even if they had kept them, if there truly was no sperm on there, like it might not have yielded anything anyway, but still.
So you've already wiped the scales from my eyes about the milk truck driver, but let's go to a list of suspects. So I love the colloquial terms that you use. Cheryl's brothers use the term the old man when discussing their dad, which a lot of people do of that generation probably. Hey, old man, their dad. But I would never be able to call my grandfather that. That's, you don't do that. Yeah.
I did not think of it as offensive, but when my own father read the blog, he was like, that is not something you're supposed to say about your dad. And I kind of laughed because I called my dad Pops. I was like, hey, Pops. But he said it's not really, and her brothers in no means said it disrespectfully, but it was funny how my own dad was like, you would never call me the old man. That's so. I thought it was a term of endearment. Like my dad acted like it was this horrible thing to say about your dad.
But I feel like it might almost come down on gender lines. I've heard Mark discuss his father, Gary Humphreys, rest in peace, as, the old man does this, but never, I don't think to his face. I think he mostly...
No. We called him Pop.
Yeah, you called him Pop to his face. You would say the old man just very rarely in discussing things when he wasn't present. It wasn't something you said. So I just love the fact that your blog is so authentic. You don't polish anything up to make it prettier. You lay it out there the way it is. So you call your first instinct as far as a perpetrator, a person of interest, the man on the porch, because that's where you met him, for lack of a better word, when you were 16, and that's pretty much where he stayed.
Yes, and that's where he hung out.
Yeah.
And you know what else? I did not, so as not to out the house, even though a lot of the locals know what I'm talking about, but I don't want people going there, sightseeing. But if one would Google image the house, he's sitting on the
there.
Porch.
Yeah.
I swear to you.
Google Earth has him on the porch.
Creepy.
I love it.
Okay,
Creepy.
that's kind of creepy.
That's creepy. Interesting as shit.
And I saw the copyright on the photo says 2016, and he died in 2016. So
Wow.
I'm going to bet it's one of the last images of him.
Of him, yeah.
Yes, sitting on that damn porch.
So you have seen this man at a young age, and he has been there for decades in an odd arrangement, living with like a sister and a lot of weird
Mom.
a lot of weird stuff. I mean, we could talk for a couple of days because again, go to goneinthefog.video.blog because you'll find all of this information in such a beautiful form. But so one of the other things I love about the blog is that you are quick to explain when you think you may have made a mistake, and we're like, it's this guy, it's the guy, it's the man on the porch, and I knew it, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it, we all knew it. And then you're at an event where you speak to an investigator who says, I don't think he did it. And you're like, it must have felt like somebody punched you in the gut. Yeah.
Yes.
So he was weird, and the police talked to him and kept him in line and would say, hey, stop. He did weird shit, like sit in his truck at the end of the street and look at kids. And I mean, how could you really not think it's him? But it may not have been him. I mean, he's still on the person of interest list, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Okay.
And in fairness, you're allowed to be weird. And I mean, people can creep people out. You're allowed to sit on your porch and stare at people. And I mean,
you are.
He didn't do himself any favors, but as far as we can tell, he never approached a child. He never talked to any of them. He never put his hands on anyone. And so could he one random morning have grabbed a kid and thrown her in his car? And he could have. But does that typically happen? And then he continues to just be weird and never strikes again. I don't know. Like, maybe.
It could, but you're right. He's probably being pushed a little bit further down the list now. So let's talk about some of the persons of interest.
Okay. So then there's that officer that you just referred to. It said, I know you've spent a lot of time looking at the man on the porch, but I don't think he's the one. There's another one that lived on the street, and I'll never forget it. Like, I remember standing against the wall thinking, I'm gonna pass out right now, because I had spent so much time digging on the man on the porch. So then we spent months looking into the second suspect, or person of interest, however you want to say it. But he lived on the street. He was known to be violent, more with adults. He was in a car theft ring and was pretty skilled at it. He was a heavy drug user. He was known to have domestic issues like violence. I don't mean to minimize it, but sometimes with he was young. He was 19 and he lived with his mom and stepdad, but he had a young wife and a couple kids.
And didn't the car ring have a little connection to close to where her body was found?
Yes.
Yeah.
They dumped car parts out there, supposedly. Like, it was a dumping sort of site.
So he would know.
He would know, or he would know people who would know.
Right.
But to go back, to be fair, the man on the porch, his family owned property.
Yeah, you found connections that I just was like, oh, again.
I know, because you think that could be the smoking gun. And it's like, nope, everybody has connections. Darn it.
Right.
So a lot, maybe I shouldn't exaggerate and say a lot, but quite a few police officers who investigated felt very strongly about this guy. And some of the people who lived on the street said I could just tell, like, he was evil, like he would be the one to do it. But I have learned that you can get tunnel vision, and you can get a feeling in your gut, and then you stick with that feeling. And I would kind of go down that road thinking, okay, he's violent. He could have been on drugs. He lives on the street. He could have seen her and picked her up that morning, and she would have recognized him. But I eventually can, like, emotionally disconnect from it and say, but he might not have driven down the street that day, and he might have. There's a lot of reasons why it doesn't fit him either. Meaning, he has no history of messing with girls or rape or molestation. He's a druggie, and he's violent with grown men and maybe with domestic violence issues, but would he just randomly pick up a 10-year-old and just for fun do this? He maybe, if people on drugs have done lots of horrible things, but he did say some incriminating things to the police, like, I probably was the last person to see her alive. I drove past her that morning and we looked at each other, but I drove on and she walked the other way. And he supposedly cleaned out his car very thoroughly, including pressure washing his trunk, which everyone agrees is not normal. But they could never find anything. He passed a lie detector test, which is a whole other conversation. He said, I didn't do it. I saw her. I don't know. But he also said he saw her at like 9:30 in the morning, which everyone agrees.
The time was off.
Yeah, he doesn't even know what time he's talking about.
It sounds to me like a guy who wants to be important.
That's exactly what some of the state police investigators had said through the years.
Oh my goodness, I guess I should be in
Melissa.
Law enforcement.
He was inserting himself.
He was. It sounded like, it just sounds from what you've said that he's a guy that probably his big bravado behaviors is for low self-esteem, and he's trying to make himself more important in the case than he may not have even seen her that day.
Right.
I mean, if he's putting the time 3 hours later than when she left, that's a whole different time of day, really. And yeah. And
here's the thing too about him is he was not a great person. He had some crony kind of friends, but after 50 years, not one. I have tried. I have talked to people, and not one person has ever come forward and said he mentioned it. He never even mentioned it. Right. So somebody like that could just swallow it and forget it. But you'd think that after 50 years, it would leak out somewhere
in a bar, and a drug haze. Yeah. And he never spoke about it to anyone that we know of. It just sounds like something that was a big deal on his street at the time, and he wanted to be part of the big deal.
Right.
And made himself look, worse than he
And
even
I'll tell
is.
you that there are people that will strongly disagree, and people that I respect really that have said, like, I truly believe it was him. And it's based on sort of how he acted and what he said. But I can't say that I don't think it's him, but I don't have this real strong feeling in my gut about it either.
Right. Right. So, so you mentioned that some investigators with the Kentucky State Police think that guy on the street who lived on the street, may have just been inserting himself. So I'm guessing over the years, and I find this too in some of the cases I cover for the podcast, that jurisdictions overlap. Over time, a case gets sent to a different jurisdiction, and then sometimes it gets sent back. But at this time, Cheryl's case is being safeguarded by the Kentucky State Police. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So I know you have spoken to the person who's kind of the lead, and that I just love your moxie. You marched yourself down to, is it Lexington? It was
Dry Ridge. So they have, there's different posts. Right. So he's in the post in Dry Ridge.
Okay. So you went there and you were like, hey, I'd like to talk to someone, and they actually let you, or he actually let you look at the file, right?
No.
Oh.
So no, I wish.
Oh, I thought that's what...
Well, let me back up for a moment. The one good thing for Cheryl is because she was found in Pendleton County, which is a rural, I hate that word, by the way, a rural county out here in Kentucky. In 1971, the state police were the governing agency.
Okay.
So that day that the milkman found her, the state police came immediately because they were in charge of that county.
Okay.
So they have housed her file since the beginning of when her body was found.
Okay.
So in Highland Heights, they were investigating for the 2 weeks she was missing. And that file is sort of minimal because it was just them kind of riding around asking people, they didn't know a crime had been committed.
No, and they took their sweet time in my mind.
Yeah.
It's like,
they did a couple search parties. And,
right. I'm like, no, you don't wait till the next day.
Right.
I loved the part of the blog where her brothers are saying, yeah, they're looking in people's backyards on our street. She's not in someone's backyard.
Right.
And they're
Just
looking.
be laying out there.
Yeah, she's just laying in the backyard. No one knows. Oh, look, there's a girl in my backyard. I mean, yeah, the search sounded like it wasn't definitely as mindful as searches are today. Like
now, yeah. I'll say this because I know there's some people from the blog who will, I don't want to say take offense, but a lot of people remember those searches and their parents, their dads participated. Like the townsmen turned out to help.
Sure.
And they walked the woods and they walked the yards and like,
yeah, it's
my
like
dad
100,
remembers.
Yeah, 100 volunteer police and firemen.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so people did show up to help.
Of course.
And so like, I guess I want to give them the Highland Heights police credit. At least people came, but what were they looking? They didn't know what they were. I mean, looking for her or like a shoe or
right. It wasn't organized. It wasn't as organized.
And they were looking through like people's cars. Like they were just kind of and asking, "Can we search?" So they were trying, but again, they didn't know. They still thought she could have been on a bus somewhere.
Right.
Like we didn't know a crime had been committed. So the good news is that police file has always been with the Kentucky State Police.
That is great.
And I talked to so this is where I get creative. I sent 2 open records letter requests.
I remember you said the first one was denied because of lack of information. I was like, oh girl, at least you got a response. A lot of times I don't even get an answer back. So I was proud of you for putting in an open records request and getting at least a response. So then you did it again.
And then I have an attorney friend and they said this wasn't specific enough. And he said, you need to list, like, I want crime scene photos. I want testament, like literally list everything you can think of that you would want that could be in that file. And so I did. I bulleted it. And then I got another letter back that denied it, which I knew it probably would be denied. But just because this time it's an open homicide, we can't give that out because it could destroy a case. But at least I wanted my name. I wanted to be a pest. Like I wanted them to know. So then I thought, okay, well, I'm not getting in with anybody. I need somebody in the family to call. And by then I had not yet talked to her brothers. I sent them messages on Facebook and hadn't heard back. And I definitely did not want to push them or be traumatizing to them. So I had met a cousin of hers who was a Spegall, was her maiden name, like a second cousin. And she is this like bulldogged Southern woman who pulls like no punches and doesn't take no for an answer. And she had said, sweetheart, I'll do anything you need me to do. So I just sent her a message and said, I need you to call the Kentucky State Police and say, this is my cousin and I want to know what's going on. And so she did. And they gave her the runaround. And she finally said, I'm calling here every day until someone from the state police calls me back. And within a couple of days, she got the state trooper on the phone.
And this is a magical moment here, because what you're telling people, anyone within the sound of our voices, if they have a family member who maybe is missing or their case is unsolved, and I love that you said, I'm going to be a pest. You're not a pest, and yet be a pest. Mm-hmm. What you need is you need a Beth Rowland in your corner. You need somebody. The cases that get solved is somebody's pounding on, the sheriff's office counter. Listen to me. Help me. I'm not going away until you do. Right. So I'm so happy that her cousin, got an infusion of you and is not going away. So the trooper called her, and how did that go?
And then they chatted, and she explained who she was and what they were trying to do. And he was asking her questions not just to get an idea of what was happening and what the interest was. And then she told him about me, and she said, some of what you're asking, I don't know, but Beth Rowland, she knows it all. You got to call this woman. And so he said to her, like, you can give her my number and have her call me. And so the very next day I did, because I had to carve out time, but I thought, he said to call, I'm calling. Like, this is a sign. And I mean, it was probably the most nerve-wracking phone call I can remember making in my entire life. Like maybe calling a teenage boy like back in the day. Like,
Right.
But I mean, I was like shaking, calling, thinking, oh my gosh,
Sure.
like don't mess this up. Don't mess this up.
Oh.
And he was so nice and engaging. And he said, like, I when I talk in his voice, I always have a little accent. Like, I've read your blog, I've read it. And so like and then I thought, oh my gosh, he reads the blog. So he had familiarized himself with who I was and what I was doing and how far I'd come. And I said, will you meet me? I will tell you everything I have. And I want you to tell me whatever you can tell me. And he said, yes. And so we met. And I mean, just that he would agree to meet me. And so I drove down to the post and I got to go to the police station, which now my husband is a police officer. So part of it is, that's intimidating for some people, and I have respect for it, but I'm also not like freaking out that I'm in a police station.
Right.
Like, here we go. It's an office like anywhere else.
Right.
And so he sat there with his notepad, and then he went in the other room and came out with a case file. And I'm not kidding you. It was thicker than the Bible, maybe the Bible and the phone book stacked on top of each other. It was like a 3-ring binder. It was amazing. And he would not let me see it, and I respect that. Like but I was sharing information, and he's paging through, and I will confess that I'm like a teacher who can read upside down and backwards. So I was trying everything I can, like across the table, to see what I could find. But I really didn't get any goods. But he was cross-checking and he said, like, you've talked to like way more people than anybody has talked to in probably like 40 years. And I said, yeah, I know. Like anybody that's alive that has any kind of connection, like I'm finding them and we're talking to them. So from there, it kind of gave him a focus of where, like, he's in charge of several cold cases. And then this one was assigned to him, but he needed a push, which we gave him. And then a starting point of, okay, who then should I talk to first? And I'm not saying he outright asked me, but it was part of that conversation was, well, you can't talk to the man on the porch because he died in 2016. So we kind of went through the status of everybody. So I had done the legwork, and I'm happy to have done it. So then he didn't need to go and find out that the man on the porch was dead. I already knew it. I could tell. I mean, I have everybody's death dates memorized. I'm like, he'd say, now, does so-and-so have a brother? I'm like, yep, he lives in Ohio. And like, I knew everything. And that was my goal, was I wanted to have an answer to anything he needed to know so that I could just help.
You do. Yeah. And you do. I mean, your blog is literally the best place to go for everything, Cheryll. I mean, it is really comprehensive. It's, so I know you don't want to say something before the next chapter comes out, but is there anything? It sounds like I had no idea about the milk truck guy. So know. Is there anything else that you want
to? Well, can I say one thing about the milk truck guy?
Of course.
Recently, I've dug. I mean, I've done whatever I can, and I can find nothing but glorious compliments about that man. And he started a church, and
of course he did.
Yes, sorry, of course he did. No, yeah, like they called him the preacher man. He was like the preacher, like that was literally his nickname. I have talked on the phone to people he delivered milk to, and they said they would be shocked if they found out he was the killer. He was so kind.
Well, that happens.
It does happen. It absolutely happens. But it's just interesting when you have the man on the porch that's creepy.
You just knew. Yeah, exactly. So many people just knew it was him. Right.
Yes. And you have the man that lived on the street that was, a druggie and a car thief and violent. And then you have this guy that everyone holds on a pedestal. And I'm not saying that he couldn't have done it. But I do want to say, in terms of character witnesses, even though he's deceased, there were hundreds.
Okay.
So I was really, I know it sounds sort of sick, but like you're hoping to try and get the goods. Like somewhere out there, there's this dark side, and like I couldn't find it if there was. So in my meeting with the brothers, which was years in the making, such
an amazing thing that
Gosh, it was such a beautiful day.
Yeah,
it was really a great experience. But they shared that they recently had talked to the detective who indicated to them that there was a new suspect, and it's not. It was somebody I think that had been on the fringes, but now they're looking at more closely. And so they said to me, they really did not have many requests of me that day. We shared information and they listened to everything I had uncovered, but they said, now that we have this information, we want you to write about it, because we want people to know that there's this new suspect, and we want people to come forward if they have information. So it's exciting because I'm gonna write about him. But I'll tell you, it was a local business owner.
Okay, I was gonna say, was it someone who was ever under the microscope before?
Not really.
Okay.
Information came in about him maybe 6, 7, 8 years after Cheryll had died, and I think, I don't want to knock the state police, but by then it was kind of cold.
Right.
And nobody was calling to check on the status of her case at that point. So it was like this information came in and it went in the file, but I don't think anybody really, I think they interviewed the guy and they poked around a little, but it didn't go anywhere.
Okay.
And it just kind of sat. And now they're really looking into it more. And so
his name is in the file.
Yes.
So he was maybe questioned and sounds like, arbitrarily just kind of questioned because he was in the area and he was a local business owner. Do you know if he's still alive?
He's not.
Okay.
None of these people are alive, which picks me off.
It happens when a case is this old, but you never know.
Yeah,
but there are probably people alive that knew him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Cheryl's dad was an acquaintance.
Oh.
Yeah. And there are some stories coming in that he may have talked about committing the crime.
Oh, talk to friends or something, and
and that, it's because no one else on our persons of interest possible suspect list has ever
talked about it.
As far as we could tell, ever talked about it. And now you have this guy talking about it.
That's very interesting. I cannot wait.
Yes.
I cannot wait.
To keep my promise to her brothers, I said that I would write about it, and I'm not breaking any kind of confidentiality with the police or anything because I'm getting my information straight from her family. So,
right. This, I cannot wait for the next chapter.
Oh, thank you. I know. And we learned a lot that day from her brothers, and I wrote the first kind of chapter about my meeting with them, and it's like, okay, and then it rolled into a second, and it's like there's so much. It's going to take a few more entries, I think, to make sure I'm thorough. But
so one of my favorite things ever was finding and reading the chapter where you had started a GoFundMe, and I wanted to know how long it took before you got the money together to get her a headstone. It
did not take very long.
I bet.
I would say maybe a month, from start to finish. And the donations were like $20 here, $20. And people that were friends of mine were donating. People were handing me cash, and I was, in an envelope. And so the GoFundMe doesn't even reflect the extra money that I got. So,
such a beautiful story. I mean, it really is.
People are so good.
In the blog, it's such a beautiful story that, and the explanation, it's like, so why didn't she have one all these years? And you were shocked that you found out she didn't. And it's like, maybe something so terrible, the family couldn't face it. Maybe the dad, maybe Billy Joe just, didn't want to deal with it anymore. I mean, there's lots of reasons why it would happen. And when you found out that it's not rare, it happens more often than we want to, I think people get traumatized and exhausted by death of any kind. And sometimes it's like, oh, it's the last thing I have to do. Now I have to do this. Yeah. And it makes you relive it over and over again. And something as terrible as Cheryl's death, but what you did was magnificent.
Thank you. And it was from the generosity of the readers and people that knew her and some of her extended family members. So a local headstone company came forward and said, we would love to design it. And the woman there was great. I was saying I want an angel and I want to incorporate a cardinal, and she would send me specs. I'm like, I hate saying no, I'm like, I don't quite like that. But I'm like, this is like important, a really big deal, right? So we went back and forth. and she really worked with us about what our vision was, and we were really pleased with the final product.
It's gorgeous. I mean, it's such a beautiful remembrance of her picture, the type of stone, everything about it is really exquisitely beautiful, really beautiful.
We were happy to have done it for her.
Yeah. And I just have to say this, the italics part of those last two chapters, 55 and 56, is in my mind the best quote for any cold case. Work together and keep talking. Yes. I mean, that is a beautiful statement, and it encompasses every cold case. One of the things that has bothered me in the past is that a lot of law enforcement jurisdictions would keep things so close to the vest that they wouldn't communicate with a jurisdiction in the next town, let alone the next county, God forbid the next state. Mm-hmm. So, even if you're close to 3 states, the tri-state area, getting law enforcement to communicate just seems like it was a mountain no one would ever cross. And now I am so enthused by, I will tell you, I have talked to recently detectives in Cincinnati, Indiana State Police detectives, and in Boone County, Kentucky, and they all know each other. I mean, great. On a very familial level. They all, hey, oh, that guy's great. Hey, that woman's phenomenal. They all know each other because they've all talked about cases that, they could have had information on that would help each other. It's just
shocking.
It is. It's so crazy that it took this long. But your quote, work together and keep talking, is just magnificent. That's what has to happen in cases like this. So while we're waiting for the next installments, is there anything you want your readers or the listeners of this podcast to know or do that could be helpful?
We've kind of come to the realization, and it pains me to say it out loud, that this will probably not be solved through DNA.
Right.
Unless somebody comes forward with her clothing, and you know what? There's a 1 in a million chance that maybe somebody did keep it somewhere.
Right.
And even then, what it might yield, I don't know.
Right.
But we think that whoever did it, somebody has to know.
Right.
And that person could be alive.
Absolutely.
And they're sitting on a secret. And we realize that people's loyalties change through the years, and people grow older and want to get it off their chest, which is, I've listened to your work on the Randy Sellers case, right? That's like, as people age, is somebody going to cough it up, because the truth is out there, and it might not be proven through DNA. And you know what? It might not get solved in a court of law.
Right.
But let's finish the story. And Cheryl's oldest brother, he said to me that day, I don't want to spend my life kind of continuing to wonder. And I love that you're researching everybody, and we have our pros and cons list, but I don't want to know who we think probably did it. I want to know who did it.
Right.
And I know that he might go to his grave someday and never have that answer. And it's horrible.
But it won't be because you haven't tried, for sure.
Right. This is it. And I'm not that I'm the end all be all, but we've got the cold case detective working on it. It's been 50 years now. She's got herself a headstone. Her story is out there, and her story really shouldn't be about her death, but
right.
It should be about the injustice that was done.
Exactly.
And if somebody knows, or somebody even thinks they have a faint memory of something that's just odd,
right.
Let the police figure it out. Because if you think of it as a puzzle piece, that one little passing conversation or murmuring that you heard about 50 years ago, that might actually link in to other parts that are known.
The hair on your neck stood up when someone said something.
Yes.
A detail like you never forgot. Your now husband driving you by the house with the man on the porch. I mean, it could be decades later, and it is decades later, but it could be something that, someone, like you said, overheard, something struck them as odd. There are no pieces that are too small. None at all.
That's
so
exactly.
Where, besides your blog, which is the clearinghouse for everything Cheryl, and you said you said it's not like I'm the be all end all. I'm going to call you the conductor, and it's an orchestra that you are leading, and I understand you're a music teacher,
Right.
but you're the conductor, and
I like that analogy.
Yeah, you're the conductor, and there is a big choir of humans out there thinking about Cheryl, wondering about what happened, working on it quietly, silently, sometimes loudly, different, sotto voce? I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but, I'm calling you the conductor, and I know there are a lot of people in the choir, but if somebody wants to join the choir, where do they go? Besides your blog, is there a number for the Kentucky State Police?
So if I will say now that her story is out there, if somebody calls the Kentucky State Police, and it would be post 6, which is the Dry Ridge post.
Okay.
If you called another post, I'm sure they'd get them the information, but they're in Dry Ridge. It's like if someone would call down there and say, I have information about the Cheryll Spegal case, they would know exactly now.
Thank you, Beth Rowland, so much for being with us today. I mean, you're kind of a gem, and I am so in love with goneinthefog.video.blog, and we'll have information in the outro about the blog and about where people can call the Kentucky State Police if they know of anything. And we adore you, and we would love to talk to you pretty much anytime. So if there's like a break or anything you want to talk about, I'm just convinced that you're going to have your own podcast, because no matter what you say, you have a beautiful voice. And it's already kind of a podcast. The blog is already kind of a podcast. But, I would love for you to have your own podcast about this case or any others. But you're welcome to come on this podcast anytime.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Thank you again to Beth Rowland for taking the time to go over Cheryl's case with us. And I know it's one of those heartbreakers for so many of us to think that someone, for all intents and purposes, got away with this, but it doesn't have to be that way forever. And her brothers are still so passionate. And I think a lot in response to how many people have loved and enjoyed and are reading Beth's blog, I think it showed them that people still care. And I think they're now wanting more than ever for Cheryl's killer to receive some sort of retribution, whether it's in this life or another. It would be good to know who did this and why. It would just be really good to have those answers. There's no such thing as closure, but some peace of mind, that would be truly a wonderful gift. So if you know anything about the murder of Cheryll Spegal, please call the Kentucky State Police Post 6. That phone number is 859-428-1212. 859-428-1212. And more cowbell.
And remember, if you'd like to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/just the Tip-Sters.